Howdy from Reno, Nevada. This is John, and we got some success in Reno for ADU ordinance. To give you a little bit of highlights on it, the state of Nevada put through an Assembly Bill 396 that kind of mandated that all the larger counties and cities have to have an ADU ordinance in place by July of 2026, or ADUs would be kind of godfathered in under the AB 396 from the state. So Reno has been working on this for about 2 years. In January of 2024, they started with surveys, and since then they've done NABs, they've done city council meetings, planning meetings, all kinds of advisory boards, things of that nature, and that's where we're at talking about it today. We finally got it passed. So on October 8th, 2025, the city council finally did a unanimous vote to approve ADUs in Reno. Now, some of this is good and some of it's bad. We did get these short-term rentals added to it, which they have fought for 2 years now, and just recently agreed to add it in as a usable part of an ADU, as well as long-term rentals. So I'm going to go over some highlights here. I've got this all written out because there's a lot of information here and I didn't want to miss anything for you. One of the big restrictions that it has is lot size of being 5,000 square feet or larger. Now, the city ordinance requires a minimum size lot of 5,000 square feet for an ADU, and this is a significant restriction that could exclude many parcels, particularly in older, denser neighborhoods. AB 396 does not specifically have a minimum lot size, and instead mandates that ADUs be allowed on any residential parcel. This provision in the Reno ordinance is more restrictive than the state law AB 396 and is a violation that could make Reno's ordinance void and unenforceable. The city already has limiting provisions that could satisfy all concerns, with all building square footage only being able to be used at 35 to 40% of the available square footage of the lot, depending on the property type. This restriction could easily be removed, with existing mandates still address the concerns of the council and the public. It would be very easy to change the usage to a higher percentage of building square footage and remove the lot size restriction. There's also a height restriction. It must be shorter than the primary. I don't see any issues with that. It complies with AB 396. The actual size of the ADU, they have a listed restriction in there, but it's very dependent on the property type, and it's kind of vague, but they're talking about a 50% of the primary or 1,600 square feet, whichever is less. So the city's ordinance does comply with AB 396, but it could still be challenged as being overly restrictive and contrary to the spirit of the intent of AB 396, which is to encourage the creation of additional housing. This is a common legal challenge in other states with similar laws. The absence of a specific size limit in AB 396 forces the city to demonstrate that its proposed size restriction is reasonable and not an undue burden that effectively prevents ADUs from being built. During council meetings, it was shown that Washoe County and the city of Sparks each only gave permits of a single ADU last year. This is not going to affect but the smallest percentage of properties. It was also discussed in council that there would be the ability to make a smaller primary be considered the ADU and a new structure be considered the primary. We'll see how that holds up in practical applications. As far as setbacks, it's the same as the primary. Building permits are going to require a licensed surveyor currently for the setback letter that it needs to be stamped. There are no modifications needed for that one. It complies with AB 396. It's pretty straightforward stuff. Again, short-term rentals. During the discussion and the motion, the council decided to allow short-term rentals, which are your Airbnbs, your Verbos, Booking.coms, things like that, which is a fantastic type of use for a homeowner because it helps them to pay their mortgages, making it a little more affordable on them. No modifications are needed for this as it complies with AB 396, which specifically states long-term rentals are a usable use for ADUs, but it didn't specifically say anything for short-term rentals. On to parking. This is the one that is going to be the biggest issue because council was very adamant about wanting an off-street parking space for an ADU, which in anybody looking at things like the available parking spaces on street parking would think that that's a reasonable accommodation. However, they didn't look into the logistics of actually installing an additional parking spot on the property. I'm going to lay out some issues with engineering that could easily be solved with a solution that I'll give you. Okay. The restriction does comply with AB 396. However, it adds a huge financial burden on the property owner in the respect that typically the best place to add an additional parking space would be next to the existing driveway. However, this would trigger federal mandates for the American with Disabilities Act. In short, the majority of the existing driveway would have to be torn out at a huge financial expense to have the new curb cut and the entire driveway meet the conditions required for ADA compliance, such as angles and slopes. In addition, if a different spot were selected so as not to trigger the ADA compliance, the current engineering drawings show 5 to 10 feet side setbacks on each side of the property depending on utilities. Plus the width of the existing driveway, typically 20 feet wide for a 2-car driveway, plus there has to be 20 feet spacing in between the driveways, as I was told multiple times by city planners. Plus a minimum width of a new driveway of 14 feet. Add all of this required spacing up, and a normal frontage of a majority of residential lots, which is 50 to 60 feet on the street side of the property, simply will not have the required space to add the additional parking spot. The homeowner's financial burden for an additional parking spot could literally double the cost of the ADU and would present such a major financial restriction that current illegal ADU homeowners would never choose to become legal. However, there is an easy solution. As part of the permitting for an ADU, it would be allowed to only have a 5-foot spacing in between the driveways on their own residential lot. This would be an easy compromise to avoid the ADA compliance on the existing driveway, but could be an ADA compliance on a new curb cut driveway. This simple modification would create an easy environment for an existing illegal ADUs to become permitted and in compliance. This would address all concerns from the city council as well as the public and ease the major restrictions the current parking restriction would cause. Sparks and Washoe County both only had a single ADU permitted from each given last year. By establishing clear and objective set of rules, AB 396 intends to make the process of getting an ADU permit similar to getting a permit for simple remodel or a home addition, a process that does not require engineering approvals beyond standard building code compliance. The process as written will have a massive additional cost, incur additional hold times increase in costs, and create undue burden to have an engineering drawings created, approved, permitted, and inspected. It is not the intention of AB 396 to create restrictions that will effectively make ADUs so expensive as to not be able to build them. The next issue is design standards. They want to ensure compatibility with the neighborhood, and the door cannot be on the same side as the primary so as not to appear as a duplex. There is a difference between subjective and objective requirements. Although AB 396 does not have a specific design standards or door placement listed, it is clear that AB 396 intent is to remove red tape and case-by-case involvement by staff. Subjective restrictions create an environment where every permit will need review. Objective restrictions would be things like setback stamps, height restrictions, and lot coverage percentages. Objective restrictions create a streamlined, by right environment that is the overall intent of AB 396. Door placement is not a typical requirement by other jurisdictions and would be considered as an unneeded barrier for ADU permitting. The next highlight is private restrictions such as CC&Rs, homeowners associations, things of that nature. AB 396 does not trump CC&Rs or HOAs. So I don't really see that specifically in the verbiage that is listed. However, it was discussed in the city council meetings, so I do believe those CC&Rs and HOAs are going to be able to hold up under any kind of challenge. The number is 1 per lot. We don't need any modifications to that whatsoever because that complies with AB 396, although it also can have up to 2 ADUs on a residential property. Reno only wants 1. So we got some big wins. The biggest one being the short-term rental usage. That's absolutely awesome. However, with the issue with the parking, that is a major issue to overcome, and I don't really feel that we're going to have any ADUs built because of that restriction. You know, it was pretty slim to begin with Sparks and Washoe County only doing 1 each last year and only having maybe 8 to 10 inquiries. So this isn't really a up and coming big fad that everybody's going to try to do, although many people in the city seem to think that it's going to cause major issues. The data just doesn't show that whatsoever. But the parking issue is really going to be a very restrictive problem that I'm not sure that we're going to really overcome that because of the Americans with Disabilities Act and having to tear out the entire driveway to get it next to the existing driveway and not having any relief from the 20-foot spacing. So I've had issues with the planning department before telling me bad information, and we did bring up engineering drawings looking at that specific subject. So perhaps something can change, and I certainly hope it does. I hope that I'm wrong and that that parking issue won't be that big a deal, because as it is right now, to have to tear out most of your driveway to simply put in some different slopes and different angles to be ADA compliant when the entire rest of the street is not ADA compliant doesn't really make sense. I don't have a problem with putting a parking spot there, but some of the logistics of it are so restrictive that I don't feel that the ADUs will get built as much as they think they will get built. So either way, ADUs are legal in Reno, and that's a fantastic thing. We can use them for long term, we can use them for mid-term, for short term. I didn't see any mention of rent by the room type of strategies, but I'm sure that would be available as well. And you know, don't confuse the two things between a guest house, a innkeeper's house, a, you know, like a manager for the property type of thing. An ADU is completely separate verbiage that allows for kitchens to be in there, and that is a huge difference, because there are pretty strong restrictions for the rest of those terminologies. So an ADU makes it where it's actually available to have a ability to make money with it, and that's really the purpose of an ADU. Whereas some of these other types of strategies are more for having, you know, like your teenage kids or your elderly parents live with you, something to that effect. So big news, it's huge. We really love that this finally got forced from the state of Nevada, but Reno was already working on it. So, you know, they did a fantastic job with looking at all of the neighborhood advice, all the surveys, all the neighborhood advisory boards. There's just been a ton of input, and this isn't the first time ADUs have been brought up. These discussions have been going on for at least a decade. So, you know, it's about time that they got passed. And you know, moving forward, I certainly hope that this is a viable new option for homeowners, so that we can start, you know, making it a little more affordable to actually own property in Reno. Because depending on which survey you're looking at, you know, we're looking at an average household property, a single family property, being anywhere from 560 up to 640,000, you know, depending on which survey you're looking at. So these properties are very expensive. It makes it very difficult to make that payment, and having the ability to be able to build an ADU and be able to rent that out is huge for people to be able to, you know, have a little more affordability with the property. So this is John from Deconstructing Dreams signing off. Y'all have a great day.